The day the sky cracked open, Marcus Webb was eating a ham sandwich. He was sitting at his desk on the 14th floor of the United Earth Defense Command building in Denver, Colorado, going through the same boring reports he always went through on a Tuesday morning. Coffee lukewarm. Sandwich decent. Reports mind-numbing. That was Marcus's life. Or at least, that's what it had been for the past 11 years since he joined UEDC as a junior communications analyst. Now he was senior analyst, which meant he got a slightly bigger desk, a slightly better view of the Rocky Mountains through the glass window, and slightly more boring reports to sort through. He was on page 47 of a signal interference log when the alarm went off. Not a fire alarm. Not a drill. Not the soft, polite chime that meant someone had left a coffee mug in the microwave again. This was the alarm. The one they tested once a year. The one that made every person on every floor of the UEDC building stop dead in their tracks and feel something cold run down the back of their neck. 3 long, low tones followed by a high-pitched sustained screech. The Omega signal. The one that meant, something has made contact. Marcus was on his feet before he even realized he'd stood up. His sandwich hit the floor. He didn't notice. Webb, his supervisor, Lieutenant Colonel Dana Holt, was already at the door of her office, her face pale as chalk, her dark hair pulled back sharp, her eyes wide with something Marcus had never seen in Dana Holt's eyes before. Fear. My station? Marcus asked. All stations, she said. Get downstairs. Now. The elevator was too slow. Marcus took the stairs, 3 at a time, down to the sub-basement, the communications core where the walls were lined with screens and the air always smelled faintly of burnt electronics and recycled oxygen. When he pushed through the heavy doors, the room was already packed. Every analyst, every operator, every technician who had clearance to be in that room was already there, standing in a semicircle, staring at the main screen. Marcus pushed his way to the front. The main screen, 12 feet wide, 6 feet tall, capable of displaying the entire mapped surface of the known solar system in real-time detail, was showing something Marcus had never seen before. Not in 11 years of working in signals analysis. Not in all his training. Not in any simulation. It was a formation. Ships. Hundreds of them. No, thousands. Moving in a structured, deliberate, geometrically perfect formation from the outer edge of the solar system, beyond Neptune, past the Kuiper Belt, moving steadily and unmistakably toward Earth. They were enormous. The smallest of them registered at 6 times the length of the largest aircraft carrier ever built. The largest, the one at the center of the formation, was so big that the system's automatic scale calibration had adjusted itself 3 times already, because it kept assuming the reading must be an error. It was not an error. How long have they been there? Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. We picked them up 14 minutes ago, said Chin, the night shift analyst who should have gone home 2 hours ago and clearly hadn't. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost. But based on the trajectory and the speed, Webb, they'd been moving for weeks. We just couldn't see them until they crossed the threshold. What threshold? Whatever they were using to hide themselves, Chin said quietly. They turned it off. That hit the room like a hammer. They turned it off. Not discovered. Not revealed. Turned off. Which meant they had chosen to be seen. Which meant this wasn't a first contact the way humans had always imagined it. Nervous hellos, radio signals, cautious probing from a safe distance. This was a statement. A deliberate, calculated, overwhelming statement. We are here. We have always been here. And now we want you to see us. Are they broadcasting anything? Dana asked from behind Marcus. Yes, said Chin. He looked at Marcus specifically because Marcus was the best they had. That's why I called you. Marcus sat down at his station. He pulled up the signal. It was layered, dozens of frequencies, dozens of languages stacked on top of each other, cycling through them methodically, as if the sender had already done the work of figuring out how humans communicated and was simply scrolling through options to find one they could parse. English appeared in the cycle within 40 seconds. Marcus isolated it, cleaned it, amplified it, and then he read it. He read it again. He read it a 3rd time because some part of his brain refused to accept it on the first 2 passes. Then he stood up, turned around, and looked at Dana Holt. The room was completely silent. Every eye was on him. What does it say? Dana asked. Marcus Webb, senior communications analyst, father of 2, eater of ham sandwiches, a man who had spent 11 years doing the most boring job in the most important building in Denver, took a slow breath. It says, he began, his voice steady because he forced it to be, that we have 72 hours to formally surrender the sovereignty of Earth to something that calls itself the Galactic Sovereignty Collective. It says that resistance is not recommended. It says that they have done this. Marcus paused, checked the number again, made sure he had it right, 417 times before. And that no species they have ever approached has refused. The silence in the room stretched on for a long moment. Then Dana Holt said very quietly, "Call the president." Marcus reached for his phone. And somewhere in the back of his mind, something else was forming. Not fear. Not panic. Something older, something harder, something that had no real name but felt a lot like the moment before a storm, when the air goes perfectly still and you just know that whatever comes next is going to change everything. He didn't know yet what the Black Armada was. He didn't know that the name existed or what it meant or what it would cost. He didn't know that 72 hours from that moment, the word surrender would be the funniest joke anyone on Earth had ever been asked to consider. He just picked up the phone. And Earth woke up. The president of the United Earth Council, a body that had only existed for 18 years, formed after the climate accords of 2031 had finally forced the fractured nations of the world into something resembling a shared government, was a woman named President Alicia Morano. She was 61 years old, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, and had spent 30 years in geopolitics before she ever set foot in the council chambers. She was not easily rattled. When the call came in from UEDC Denver at 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, she was in the middle of a trade dispute negotiation between the East Asian Economic Bloc and the Atlantic Federation. She excused herself from the room, walked calmly into the adjacent private office, took the secured call from Dana Holt, listened without interrupting for 4 minutes and 30 seconds, and then said, "Get me the Defense Council. Get me the Science Advisory Board. Get me General Vasquez and Admiral Chin Park. And somebody get me coffee that is actually hot this time." Within 3 hours, every major government still operating under its own partial sovereignty, the United States, the European Union, the Chinese Republic, Russia, India, Brazil, the African Continental Authority, had been briefed. Within 5 hours, there were emergency sessions happening simultaneously on 4 continents. Within 7 hours, the footage from UEDC sensor arrays had been released, first to the governments, then after a heated 2-hour argument about whether releasing it to the public would cause panic, to the public. It caused panic. Not total, civilization-ending panic. Humans were more resilient than that. But there were runs on grocery stores in 40 cities, traffic jams that stretched for miles outside major population centers, and a brief but intense period in which every religious institution on the planet experienced a significant spike in attendance. Social media predictably imploded. The word surrender trended globally within minutes of the first leaked translations, and the response was, putting it gently, not favorable. Marcus watched it all from a cot in the sub-basement of UEDC Denver, where he had been for 6 hours straight, refining the translation, cross-referencing the signal layers, trying to pull every piece of information he could from the message itself. Because that was the thing about Marcus, he didn't just hear what people said. He heard how they said it. And there was something about this message that nagged at him. "Chin," he said around 2 in the morning when most of the room had thinned out to skeleton crew. Chin looked up from across the room, bleary-eyed, a half-eaten granola bar in his hand. "The message repeats on a cycle," Marcus said. 63 minutes, 42 seconds. "Every cycle is identical." "Yeah," Chin said. "We logged that hours ago." "Right. But look at this." Marcus pulled up the frequency map on his secondary screen and waved Chin over. Chin came still chewing. Marcus pointed. "Every 63 minutes there's a micro gap. Here. 11 milliseconds. It's nothing, it looks like a transmission artifact. But it's not. It's too consistent. It's too precise." Chin leaned closer. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Marcus said slowly, "that this message has a second layer. Something embedded inside it that isn't meant to be read. Or, wasn't meant to be read by anyone who wasn't looking for it." Chin stared at him. "You think they hid something inside their own message?" "Not them," Marcus said. He pulled up the spectral analysis and let Chin see what he was seeing. The carrier wave on the embedded signal is different. Slightly different frequency signature. Different construction. It's the same species technology, but it's not the same sender. The silence between them lasted a long moment. "Someone else sent us a message," Chin said. "Inside their message." "Someone who knew we'd receive it," Marcus said. "Someone who knows how we process signals. Someone who has been watching us long enough to know what we'd look for and what we'd miss." He leaned back. "Someone who wants to talk to us without the Galactic Sovereignty Collective knowing about it." Chin set his granola bar down. "Webb. That is either the most important discovery in the history of the human race, or you need about 16 hours of sleep." Marcus looked at the screen. At the 11-millisecond gap, repeating, precise, patient. Like a hand tapping quietly on the back of a door, hoping someone on the other side would hear it. Yeah, he said. Probably both. Meanwhile, 53 floors above him, Dana Holt was on a video call with General Arturo Vasquez, the commanding officer of Earth's unified military force, and the call was not going well. The Sovereignty Collective's formation hasn't moved, Dana reported. They're holding position just inside the orbital path of Mars. They're not threatening. They're waiting. Patient, Vasquez said. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, dark-skinned, with close-cropped silver hair and a voice that sounded like it had been carved out of granite. He had commanded Earth's forces through 2 regional conflicts and 1 full-scale war, and he had the look of a man who had been waiting for this specific moment his entire life, not with dread but with a kind of grim readiness. That's either a good sign or the worst possible sign. What's our position if they decide to push? Dana asked. Vasquez was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was measured, careful. Honestly? UEDC has 3 orbital defense platforms, 12 deep space patrol vessels and 42 atmospheric fighter wings. Against a formation of that size. He paused. We'd make them notice us. That's about all I can promise. Dana absorbed that. And if they don't move in 72 hours? If we don't give them an answer? Then we find out how patient they really are, Vasquez said. Dana closed the call. She sat alone in her office for a moment, looking out at the Denver skyline, the mountains dark against the pre-dawn sky. Then she thought about Marcus Webb's face when he read that message. The thing in his eyes, not fear, not panic. Something older. Something harder. And she thought, whatever that thing is, we're going to need a lot more of it. She reached for her phone. She had a feeling the next 72 hours were going to be the most important hours in human history. She was right. But not for the reasons anyone expected. The embedded message took Marcus 11 hours to fully decode. He didn't sleep. He barely moved from his station. He burned through 3 cups of coffee, 2 energy drinks, a bag of chips, and whatever goodwill his body had left over from the last time he'd slept properly. Chin stayed with him for most of it, helping run the decryption algorithms, building the frequency models, checking and rechecking the spectral mapping. At 4:17 a.m. on the second day of the 72-hour countdown, the message finally resolved into something readable. Marcus read it. Then he read it again. Then he sat very still for about 30 seconds. Then he called Dana Holt. She arrived in the sub-basement 14 minutes later, still pulling her jacket on, her hair not quite fully pulled back. She looked at the screen. She read the message. She sat down in the nearest chair. The message said, "To the people of Earth. We know what has been asked of you. We know what the Sovereignty Collective has promised if you comply, and what they have promised if you refuse. We know because we were once in your position. We refused. We survived. Not without cost, but we survived and we did not surrender what we were. We cannot help you openly. But we can tell you this, the Collective fears one thing above all others. They have encountered it once before in a civilization they underestimated, and it nearly destroyed them. They call it the Black Armada. They believe it to be a myth, a story species tell themselves. It is not a myth. It exists. But it must be chosen. It must be built. And it must be built in the time you have left. We cannot build it for you. We can only tell you where to look. The coordinates are embedded in this message. The knowledge exists in your own archives, in the things your scientists have discovered and not yet understood, in the things your soldiers have built and not yet dared to use. The Black Armada is not a fleet of ships. It is a decision. Once you make it, there is no going back. But you will not kneel. Good luck, humanity. The universe is watching. Silence. Dana stared at the screen for a long time. Then she said, "The coordinates. They point to a location in the asteroid belt," Marcus said. "Specifically to an object catalogued as 1247 Voss. We've known about it for 16 years. It's been on the standard survey list, but nobody's ever done a full scan because it ranked low on mineral priority." "What's there?" Marcus pulled up the next file he'd spent the last 3 hours working on. "Something we missed. Something buried inside it. A structure not natural. Not human-made. Pre-existing. It's been there for a very long time and it's been waiting." Dana looked at him. "Waiting for what?" Marcus met her eyes. "For us to be desperate enough to go looking." General Vasquez received the briefing at 6 in the morning. He listened without expression, his hands flat on the table, his eyes moving between Dana and Marcus as they spoke. When they finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The Sovereignty Collective gave us 72 hours. Yes, sir, Dana said. We've used 29 of them. Yes, sir. And we have 43 left. He looked at the coordinates on the screen. The location of 1247 Voss. The thing in the asteroid belt that had been sitting there, patient and unnoticed, for 16 years. What's the fastest ship we have that can reach that location? The UES Resolute, Dana said immediately. Commander Yara Okafor's vessel. She's currently stationed at the Mars relay point. Direct burn, she can reach 1247 Voss in 9 hours. Vasquez nodded slowly. Get Okafor on the line. Sir, with respect, Marcus said, I should go with her. Vasquez looked at him. You're a signals analyst, Mr. Webb? I decoded the message, sir. Whatever is in that structure, whatever language it speaks, whatever format its information exists in, I'll understand it faster than anyone else we could send. And we don't have time to waste. Vasquez studied him for a long moment. Marcus held his gaze. He was tired, unshaven, still wearing yesterday's shirt. He looked nothing like a soldier. He looked like a man who had eaten his sandwich off the floor 12 hours ago and hadn't stopped moving since. Fine, Vasquez said. You go. But Okafor is in command of that ship, and you follow her lead. Understood, Marcus said. And Webb. Vasquez's voice shifted just slightly. Something in it that wasn't quite warmth but was close. Get some sleep on the way. Marcus almost smiled. Yes, sir. Commander Yara Okafor was 38 years old, Nigerian-born, Oxford-educated, and had been commanding deep space vessels for the UEDC for 9 years. She had the lean efficiency of someone who had spent most of her adult life in confined spaces with limited resources and had learned to waste absolutely nothing. Not time, not energy, not words. When she received the call from General Vasquez at 6:30 a.m., she listened, acknowledged, and had the UES Resolute ready to burn within 45 minutes. Marcus boarded at 7:22 a.m. He was carrying a laptop bag, a satellite phone, and the look of a man who had made peace with the fact that the next 43 hours might be the last ordinary hours of his life, or the beginning of something so extraordinary that the word ordinary would never apply to anything again. Okafor met him at the airlock. She was tall, close-cropped hair, dark eyes that assessed him efficiently in about 2 seconds. You're the analyst, she said. Marcus Webb, he said. You look like you haven't slept. I haven't. You'll sleep for at least 4 hours on the transit, she said in a tone that made clear this was not a suggestion. I need you functional when we arrive. Whatever is in that structure, you are the one who has to read it. You are no use to me or to this planet if your brain is running on fumes. 4 hours, Marcus agreed. Good. She turned and walked toward the bridge. Try not to touch anything. Marcus followed her. And as the UES Resolute broke orbit and burned hard toward the asteroid belt, Earth fell away behind them, blue and silent and beautiful and terrified. Marcus did sleep. He slept for 4 hours and 20 minutes in a crew bunk that smelled like metal and recycled air, and he dreamed of nothing, which was probably the kindest thing his brain could do for him under the circumstances. He woke up to Okafor knocking on the bunk frame. 40 minutes out, she said. Come eat something. You'll want something in your stomach. He followed her to the small galley where a crew member, young, freckled, name tag reading Ensign Park, had put together something that might have been eggs or something egg-adjacent and coffee that was at least actually hot. Marcus ate without tasting it. His mind was already reaching ahead, toward 1247 Voss, toward whatever was waiting inside it. What are you expecting to find? Okafor asked. She sat across from him, her own coffee in hand, watching him with those efficient dark eyes. I don't know, Marcus said honestly. The message said the knowledge exists in our own archives, things we've discovered and not understood, things we've built and not dared to use. So I think whatever is inside 1247 Voss isn't going to be alien technology we can't interpret. I think it's going to be a map, a framework, something that takes what we already know and shows us how to put it together in a way we haven't tried yet. Okafor was quiet for a moment. And if it's a weapon? Then it's a weapon we build from what we already have, Marcus said. Which means it's human. Whatever the Black Armada turns out to be, it's ours. It came from us. Maybe that's the point. She looked at him for a moment with something that wasn't quite a smile but was adjacent to one. You're surprisingly calm for a signals analyst who was probably supposed to go home at 5 yesterday. I'm terrified, Marcus said simply. But terrified and calm can coexist. I found that out recently. Okafor nodded once. Yes, she said quietly. They can. 1247 Voss was not impressive to look at. It was a gray, lumpy, unremarkable rock approximately 14 kilometers across, rotating slowly in the dim light of the sun at this distance, indistinguishable from the 10,000 other rocks tumbling through the asteroid belt. The Resolute sensors swept it twice before Okafor's crew confirmed what Marcus's decryption had suggested. There was something inside it. 30 meters below the surface, in a cavity that the rock had formed around like a shell forming around a pearl, there was a structure. Perfectly regular. No organic material. No natural formation could have produced it. 16 years of survey listings had catalogued 1,247 VOS as a low-priority mineral survey target because whoever wrote the survey algorithm hadn't thought to look 30 meters down. "We go in," Okafor said. It wasn't a question. "We go in," Marcus agreed. A small team, Marcus, Okafor and 2 members of the ship's specialist crew, Sergeant Dara Miles, who handled breaching and structural assessment, and Dr. Leo Hatch, the ship's science officer, who was so excited he was practically vibrating, which Marcus found either reassuring or alarming, he couldn't decide which. They drilled down in under 2 hours. Miles was good. Efficient, precise, exactly the kind of person you wanted drilling into an asteroid that might contain something unprecedented. The structure, when they reached it, was a room. A single room, roughly circular, 12 meters in diameter, with walls that weren't stone but weren't quite metal either. Some material that sat at the edge of both, warm to the touch despite the near-zero temperature of the surrounding rock. And on the walls, covering every surface from floor to ceiling, were lines of data. Symbols, diagrams, equations, maps. Dense, layered, intricate. A library compressed into a room. Dr. Hatch made a sound that was approximately what a person sounds like when they see God. Marcus walked slowly to the nearest wall and started reading. It took him 3.5 hours. He didn't move from the spot. He barely blinked. He spoke quietly into a recorder, narrating what he was seeing, translating and interpreting in real time, his mind moving fast and quiet and precise through the layers of information. Okafor stood in the center of the room and watched him, not interrupting, not rushing, understanding instinctively that what was happening was too important to disturb. When Marcus finally stopped and turned around, his face was pale. Not with fear. With something larger than fear. "I know what the Black Armada is," he said. Okafor waited. "It's not a fleet," he said. "Well, it is a fleet. But it's not built from warships. It's not built from what we have." He paused. "It's built from how we are. What we are as a species. The things that make us specifically, uniquely human." Hatch was staring at him. "What does that mean?" "It means," Marcus said slowly, "that every piece of it already exists. Every component. Every system. We built them separately, for different purposes, without understanding that they were meant to go together. The collective has beaten 417 civilizations because every civilization they've ever faced had one way of fighting, the way they'd always fought. Power against power. But the Black Armada is built differently. It's built on," he checked his notes, made sure he had it right, "adaptive asymmetry. The capacity to do something no other species in the known galaxy has ever consistently demonstrated." "Which is what?" Okafor asked. Marcus looked at her. Then he said something that would later be quoted in every history of this event, in every language, on every human world that ever came after. "Change everything in the middle of everything and not break." The room was silent. Then Okafor said very quietly, "How long do we have?" 31 hours, Marcus said. Okafor nodded once. She turned to Miles. "Get us back to the Resolute. Now." She turned to Marcus. "You're going to explain everything you read in that room to General Vasquez on the way back. Every detail. We don't have time for a second trip." "I know," Marcus said. He looked at the walls one more time. All that information. All that history. Someone had put it here, had planned for this moment, had trusted that humanity would be worth the bet. He hoped they were right. He was going to spend the next 31 hours making sure they were. The call between Marcus Webb, Commander Okafor, General Vasquez, and President Morano lasted for 6 hours straight. The Resolute was burning back toward Earth at maximum thrust, and Marcus talked for most of those 6 hours, explaining what he had found in 1,247 VOS, translating the diagrams and equations and maps into something that a general and a president and a team of scrambling defense scientists could act on. The framework of the Black Armada was, once explained, both simpler and more radical than anything Earth's military planners had ever conceived. It was not about building bigger weapons or faster ships or stronger shields. It was about doing what humans had always done when backed into corners, when resources were limited and the odds were overwhelming. Solving problems sideways. Approaching every engagement from an angle the opponent wasn't designed to handle. Not fighting the battle the enemy had planned for. Fighting a different battle entirely, in a way that turned the enemy's strengths into liabilities. The Sovereignty Collective were masters of overwhelming force. In 417 encounters, they had faced species that responded to overwhelming force in the natural way, with force of their own or with surrender. They had never faced a species that looked at overwhelming force and said, "Interesting. Now how do we use that against you?" The framework identifies 17 core principles, Marcus said, his voice hoarse from hours of talking, his notes spread across every surface available to him in the resolute small communications bay. "I've been sending them through as we go. Your science team should have received all 17. "They have," Vasquez said. His voice was different now. Something in it had shifted over the past 6 hours. He'd come into the call skeptical, military precise, looking for hard numbers and clear tactical realities. He was leaving it as something else. Not a converted believer, Vasquez was too seasoned for blind conversion, but a man who had seen something that reframed the entire map of what was possible. "The engineering teams are already working. Marcus, the propulsion systems in the framework. You're sure those calculations are accurate?" "They're not new calculations," Marcus said. "They're existing calculations, the Yamamoto Park Drive equations from 2039, which everyone assumed were theoretically sound but practically impossible to implement. The framework shows the missing component. The reason the equations never worked is that we were trying to use them in a conventional physics environment. The framework shows how to stabilize them in a localized field. It's, Dr. Hatch, can you?" Hatch leaned into the camera, looking like a man who had not slept and did not care. "It's real. I've run it 4 times. The math holds. It's not just faster travel, it's directional unpredictability. A ship running the Yamamoto Park system at full implementation can alter its vector in transit in a way that makes it effectively impossible to predict or target. It appears and disappears on conventional tracking systems because it's not moving through space the way conventional ships move." Vasquez's jaw tightened. "How many of our ships can be retrofitted?" "That's the thing," Marcus said. "The framework doesn't recommend retrofitting existing ships. It recommends building new ones. Quickly. From existing components, combined in configurations we've never tried." He paused. "It says it can be done in 18 hours. The silence on the call was the kind of silence that precedes very large decisions. Then President Morano spoke for the first time in nearly 2 hours. She had been listening, silent, processing. When she spoke, her voice was exactly the way Marcus would have wanted the leader of Earth to sound at a moment like this. Calm, clear, and carrying the weight of everything behind it. "General Vasquez," she said. "What do you need?" "Everything," Vasquez said. "Every engineering team, every manufacturing facility, every material supply line we have. I need it all redirected. Starting now." "You have it," Morano said. "Marcus." She addressed him directly. "I'm going to ask you something and I need an honest answer." "Yes, ma'am," Marcus said. "Can we win?" Marcus thought about the room inside 1247 Voss. The walls covered in data. The handwriting, if you could call it that, of someone or something that had survived what humanity was now facing, and had left a message carefully hidden, patiently waiting, trusting that if anyone would find it and understand it, it would be the species that had managed to go from bows and arrows to orbital defense platforms in a blink of geological time. "The framework says," Marcus said carefully, "that the Sovereignty Collective has never lost. But it also says they have never encountered a species that built the Black Armada. So, strictly speaking, the data on whether we can win is incomplete." Morano almost smiled. "That's a very careful answer." "The less careful answer," Marcus said, "is yes. I think we can. But only if we commit completely. No half measures. No hedging. The framework is very specific. The Black Armada only works if every component is in place. Leave one piece out and the whole thing fails. It's not modular. It's a system." Another silence. Then Morano said, "Then we don't leave anything out." She ended the call. And across Earth, in manufacturing plants and research labs and military installations on 6 continents, in orbital platforms and deep space relay stations, in the research archives of 14 universities and the classified R&D vaults of 7 governments, everything stopped. And then everything started again, pointed in a single direction with a single purpose, burning with the kind of focused collective energy that humanity only ever managed to generate when it had absolutely no other option. 18 hours. The clock was running. General Vasquez stood in the UEDC command center in Denver, relocated from the basement to the main floor, every screen live, every station manned, and watched the feeds from 18 different manufacturing and assembly facilities. He had not slept. He did not intend to sleep. His deputy, Brigadier General Sandra Foss, stood at his right shoulder, managing the communication traffic with the efficiency of someone who had been born for exactly this kind of organized chaos. "How are we on materials?" Vasquez asked. "European manufacturing corridor has the hull composites running at 340% capacity," Foss said, reading from her tablet without looking up. "The North American precision engineering teams are ahead of schedule on the propulsion cores. The problem is the field stabilizers, the components for the Yamamoto Park system. Dr. Hatch's specifications are," she paused, chose her words carefully, "unconventional." "Unconventional how?" "The field stabilizers require a configuration of materials that we've never combined before. The individual materials exist. The combination doesn't. Our engineers are saying it's like being told to build a bridge out of sand and glass and being handed sand and glass and told to figure it out." Vasquez looked at the screen. Thought about Marcus Webb, hoarse and sleepless on a ship burning back from an asteroid, reading alien handwriting and translating it into a blueprint for the most important thing humanity had ever built. "Get Dr. Hatch on a direct line to the engineering teams," he said. He was in that room. He saw the diagrams. Let him walk them through it. "Yes, sir." "And Foss?" He waited until she looked up. "The collective. Any movement?" "None. They're holding position inside Mars's orbital path. Waiting." "How much time left on the ultimatum?" Foss checked. 22 hours, 17 minutes. Vasquez nodded slowly. "Then we have just enough time." He turned back to the screens. 18 facilities. Thousands of engineers. Every hour that ticked by was an hour closer to either something unprecedented in human history, or the most spectacular failure the species had ever attempted. He'd take the odds. The thing about humans when they are told it is impossible, is that they do not hear, impossible. They hear not yet. In the 18 hours that followed President Morano's order, something happened across Earth that had no exact parallel in recorded history, not because it was unprecedented in scale though it was, but because it was unprecedented in coherence. Humanity had mobilized before. It had built enormous things before, under pressure, against odds. But it had always done so in pieces. This nation doing this, that nation doing that, the left hand not quite knowing what the right hand was building. This time, for the first time, every hand knew exactly what every other hand was doing. And they built. In Osaka, the precision manufacturing team at the Tanaka Morris facility worked without break shifts, voluntarily, the workers coming in on their own time because someone had put the news on the floor screens and there was not a single person in that building who did not understand what was at stake. They built propulsion cores to specifications they had never seen before, following the framework's diagrams with the focused intensity of people who knew that every component they produced was going to be part of something larger than any individual one of them could fully see. In Sao Paulo, a materials science team at the University of Brazil Federal, most of them graduate students, the youngest barely 23, solved the field stabilizer problem in 4 hours and 11 minutes, by approaching it from a direction that Dr. Hatch later admitted he hadn't considered, and that probably saved the entire program. They sent the solution to 17 other facilities simultaneously. Within 30 minutes, field stabilizers were being produced at every site. In Nairobi, a structural engineering team adapted the hull composite specifications on the fly when a materials shortage threatened the timeline, substituting a carbon lattice variant they had developed for a deep-sea pressure project and discovering, to everyone's astonishment, that it performed better than the original spec. They reported this to the Central Coordination Team. The Central Coordination Team updated every facility in 8 minutes. In Ottawa, in Delhi, in Warsaw, in Shanghai, in Lagos, in Sydney, the same story in different forms. Problems encountered. Problems solved. Solutions shared instantly, implemented faster. The whole system moving with a fluidity and responsiveness that none of the engineers had believed was possible in a top-down manufacturing program. It wasn't top-down. That was the thing. Vasquez had set the goal and cleared the resources. After that, the people building it had simply built it. Helping each other, correcting each other, improving on each other's work in real time, the way humans did when they were at their very best and the stakes were high enough that ego didn't matter anymore. Marcus arrived back on Earth 14 hours into the 18-hour window. He went straight to the coordination center in Denver, where a team of 40 analysts and engineers were running the integration process, taking the components being built at 18 separate facilities and mapping out how they assembled into the full system. He walked in, looked at the boards for about 3 minutes, identified 2 integration sequencing errors that would have caused problems later, corrected them, and then sat down and started working. Nobody questioned why he was there. Nobody asked his rank or his clearance. He was the person who had read the walls of 1247 Voss. That was enough. Okafor stayed at the Resolute, which was being retrofitted as a command ship, not with the Black Armada system. The Resolute was too large and too old, but with the enhanced sensor array and the communication suite that would coordinate the Armada once it was operational. She oversaw every modification personally, with the same precise efficiency she brought to everything, never raising her voice, never showing uncertainty, her calm so complete that it spread to everyone around her. At hour 16, General Vasquez called a full status review. Every facility lead on screen. He went through the list. Propulsion cores, complete. Hull composites, complete. Field stabilizers, complete. Navigation arrays, 94%. Completion in 40 minutes. Weapons integration, 87%. Completion in 1 hour, 12 minutes. Armada AI coordination system. This was the one Marcus had flagged as the highest risk. Completion, 78%. Estimated time, 1 hour, 45 minutes. Vasquez looked at the numbers. They had 6 hours remaining before the Sovereignty Collective's ultimatum expired. They needed 2 hours, 25 minutes of build time, plus assembly time, plus launch time. It was going to be very, very close. Nobody stops, Vasquez said. Nobody takes a break. Nobody goes home. We finished this. Am I clear? He was clear. The Black Armada, when it finally took shape in the assembly bays and orbital platforms where its components were being put together, looked nothing like a conventional fleet. It was 73 vessels, not all warships, not all fighters. 22 were combat vessels, designed around the Yamamoto Park drive system, capable of appearing and disappearing on tracking systems mid-maneuver, armed with weapons that combined several existing technologies and configurations the framework specified. 20 were support and relay ships, providing the communication backbone that let the Armada function as a single coordinated system. 15 were what the framework called mirror ships, vessels whose purpose was not to fight but to reflect, to broadcast, to interfere with the collective's targeting systems and create false readings that would multiply the Armada's apparent size and location 8-fold. And 16 were something for which no existing military category had a good name. The framework called them shadow breakers, ships designed to approach the collective's largest vessels and do something that no ship in any of Earth's arsenals had ever been designed to do. But the most important single component of the Black Armada was not any individual ship or weapon or system. It was the coordination AI, the program running at the heart of the Armada that bound all 73 ships into a single responsive organism. It processed faster than any human commander could process. It updated every ship's tactical situation 1,200 times per second. It adapted. It learned. It was, in the most essential sense, the thing that made the Black Armada what it was. Not a fleet. A single being. At hour 17 the AI came online. At hour 17 and a half the first ships launched. At hour 18 the Black Armada was complete. Marcus stood at a window in the Denver Coordination Center and watched the feeds from the orbital cameras as the Armada assembled in Earth orbit. 73 ships, dark-hulled, configured in a formation that looked nothing like any military formation in the history of Earth's wars. It looked almost like a living thing. Like something that had grown rather than been built. He had his phone in his hand. He called home for the first time in 2 days. His wife, Claire, picked up on the second ring. Marcus. Her voice was steady. She was steady always. That was one of the things about her. I've been watching the news. I know, he said. I'm sorry I couldn't call sooner. Are you safe? For now, he said honestly. Pause. Then, is it going to be okay? He thought about the walls of 1247 Voss. About the message hidden inside the collective's ultimatum. About the voice in the dark that had trusted humanity enough to leave a blueprint for its own survival. About 18 facilities and thousands of engineers and 1 hour 12 minutes to solve a problem no species had ever solved before. I think so, he said. I really think so. Okay, Claire said. And in the word was everything she didn't say. Come home. We need you here. The kids are asking. I'm holding it together but I need you to come back. All of that, in one word, delivered without drama or demand because she knew what was at stake and she was choosing not to add to his weight. I love you, Marcus said. I love you too, she said. Go do what you need to do. He hung up. He looked at the Armada. 73 ships, dark and patient, holding position above the blue world they had been built to protect. 4 hours left. The Sovereignty Collective made contact exactly 4 hours before their ultimatum expired. Not via radio signal. Not via the same broadcast they'd been cycling for 3 days. They sent a single, direct, tight beam transmission to UEDC Denver, precise, personal, and very clearly designed to make a point. We know exactly where you are. We know exactly who you are. We have had our eyes on you throughout this process. The transmission was received by Marcus, who was still at his station, and who patched it through to Vasquez and Morano simultaneously. The voice, or rather the translation program's rendering of what passed for a voice in the collective's communication system, was flat, toneless, and utterly certain of itself. The kind of certainty that doesn't need to be loud. The kind that comes from having been right 417 times in a row. We have observed your activity over the past 44 hours. We are aware that you have attempted to construct a defensive response. This is not unusual. Many species attempt this. The result is always the same. We acknowledge the effort as it is more than most manage. However, the outcome does not change. You have 4 hours. Use them wisely. Consider the lives of your people. Consider the future we are offering, stability, membership, protection within the collective's framework. You will be a productive part of something much larger than your small world. This is not defeat. It is elevation. We urge you to choose wisely. Morano listened to the full transmission. Then she looked at Vasquez. Then she looked at the screen where the Black Armada was holding in Earth orbit, 73 ships dark and ready, the AI at their center running at full operational capacity. General Vasquez, she said. Yes, ma'am. Respond to them. Tell them that Earth is not surrendering. Tell them that Earth is sending a response of its own. And tell them, the faintest pause, to watch carefully. Vasquez almost smiled. Yes, ma'am. He turned to Marcus. You want to draft the response? Seeing as you've been our voice in this from the beginning. Marcus looked up from his station. Thought for a moment. Then he typed 4 words and handed them to Vasquez. Vasquez read them. His actual smile appeared, brief, hard, real. Watch. We are coming. The Black Armada launched from Earth orbit at 11:43 p.m., Denver time. 73 ships, dark-hulled, moving in a formation that to any conventional sensor array appeared as a single mass. The Yamamoto Park drives engaged at 40% capacity, not because they needed to conserve power, but because the framework specified a specific approach geometry for the first phase that required a particular velocity and trajectory. On the UES Resolute, operating as the coordination and command ship, Commander Okafor sat in the command chair and watched every ship in the Armada on her display simultaneously, the AI's real-time feed painting a perfect picture of 73 moving parts moving as one. AI status? She asked. Fully operational, said Lieutenant Amara, the officer managing the AI interface. Response time is nominal. All 73 vessels are fully integrated into the command network. Mirror ships. Standing by for deployment on your order. Shadow breakers? In position. Ready to execute on Phase 3 command. Okafor nodded. She'd spent the last 8 hours studying the framework's tactical specifications until she could recite them from memory. She understood what each phase was supposed to accomplish. She understood the theory. Now she was about to find out if theory matched reality. Helmsman, she said. Set course for the collective formation. Standard approach until I give the order to deviate. Yes, Commander. The Resolute moved. The Armada moved with it, 73 ships in perfect formation, crossing the vast dark distance between Earth orbit and the collective's position at the edge of the inner system. And on the Sovereignty Collective's command vessel, a craft the size of a small moon, crewed by beings who had done this 417 times and considered themselves beyond surprise, someone looked at their sensor readings and frowned. Because the thing approaching their position looked strange. Not threatening, not by their standards. 73 ships against their fleet of thousands. Almost insultingly small. But strange. Strange in a way that made the collective's most experienced commanders feel something they rarely felt and did not enjoy. Uncertainty. The Sovereignty Collective had a response to small fleets. They had a response to medium fleets. They had a response to massive fleets, to desperate last charge formations, to suicidal ramming tactics, to every form of conventional military engagement any species had ever attempted. In 417 encounters they had seen everything. Or so they believed. When the Black Armada reached the outer edge of engagement range, Okafor gave the first order. Mirror ships. Deploy. Pattern Sigma. 15 vessels broke from the formation simultaneously. not toward the collective. Not in any direction that made immediate tactical sense. They spread out in a precise geometric pattern, surrounding the Armada formation on multiple axes, and then they activated. On every sensor array in the collective's fleet, the picture changed. The 73 ships became, in the space of 8 seconds, 611 ships. Spread across a volume of space 3 times larger than the original formation. Moving in patterns that no ship with conventional drives could manage, because some of the mirror images were, of course, impossible. Ships that appeared to be in 2 places at once. Ships that moved faster than physics should allow. The mirror ships didn't just duplicate the Armada. They created a false tactical picture so complex and internally contradictory that the collective's targeting AI began generating conflict warnings at a rate it was not designed to handle. On the collective's command vessel there was, for the first time in a very long time, something that might be called confusion. "What are we seeing?" demanded the commander. A being that Marcus would later describe as looking like a storm made physical, all-shifting, crackling energy confined in a form that was vaguely bipedal, enormously tall, radiating the particular kind of authority that comes from having never been wrong. "We are seeing 611 vessels," said the tactical officer. "But our spectral analysis suggests 73 actual mass signatures. The remainder may be." May be what? Projections. Reflections. "We are attempting to isolate true targets." Attempt faster. But the AI was already struggling. Because the mirror ships weren't passive. They were updating their reflections in real time, responding to every scan the collective ran, adjusting the false images to counter each attempt to see through them. It was an arms race between the collective's targeting systems and the mirror ship's adaptation software, and the mirror ships were winning because they were being updated by the Black Armada's central AI, which was running at 1,200 updates per second. While the collective systems were occupied with the mirror problem, Okafor gave the second order. Combat vessels. Yamamoto Park drives. Full engagement. Pattern Kestrel. 22 ships vanished from every sensor array simultaneously. Not destroyed. Not cloaked. Gone, in the way that something moving through a localized physics field that bent conventional space tracking is gone. Present in real space but invisible to any instrument that was looking for ships moving the way ships were supposed to move. They reappeared, in the same instant, at positions distributed throughout the collective's formation. Not at the flanks, not at the rear, not in any location the collective's defensive systems were configured to respond to, because the Yamamoto Park approach geometry that the framework specified had been designed specifically to arrive at the gaps. Every military formation has gaps. The Sovereignty Collective's formation was vast and overwhelming, but vastness creates gaps, and the framework had spent its first 2 pages on exactly this principle. The bigger the formation, the more gaps, and the slower the response time to threats appearing inside those gaps rather than outside them. 22 ships, inside the collective's formation. Armed. Ready. On the collective's command vessel, 3 different alarm systems activated in the same second, and the commander experienced something that 417 victories had not prepared it for. The situation being outside its models. On the Resolute, Okafor watched the display with steady eyes. The AI was feeding her a perfect picture of every ship in the Armada, every ship in the collective's formation, every variable in real time. "Phase 2 working?" she asked. "Yes, Commander," Amara said, and she couldn't entirely keep the barely suppressed awe out of her voice. "Collective targeting systems are struggling. They can't get a clean lock on our combat vessels. The mirror ship pattern is holding. And the Yamamoto Park penetration." She stopped, checked the display again, made sure she was reading it right. "Commander, their formation is breaking. They're redirecting inner defense assets to respond to our combat vessels. That's pulling coverage from." "I see it," Okafor said quietly. She studied the display for 3 seconds, which was all the time she needed. The collective's formation was huge and experienced and powerful, but it was doing exactly what the framework said it would do, responding logically to the immediate tactical problem because logic was what 417 victories had trained it to do, and logic said, neutralize the threat inside the formation. Logic was wrong. "Shadow Breakers," Okafor said. "Execute Phase 3. The Shadow Breakers were the piece of the Black Armada that the framework's unnamed authors had been most specific about. Not in terms of their weapons or their drives, but in terms of their purpose. The framework had described them with a clarity that Marcus, translating in the room inside 1247 Voss, had found almost urgent, as if the author was leaning forward, making sure the point was understood. The Shadow Breaker does not destroy. It reveals. The collective's greatest weapon is not its ships or its weapons. It is the certainty it projects. The absolute confidence that resistance is pointless. This certainty is not just psychological. It is technological. It is broadcast. The collective maintains at the center of every engagement, a signal, a specific frequency carried by their command vessel, that affects the neural architecture of species capable of receiving it. It does not make you afraid. It makes you feel certain. Certain that resistance is pointless. Certain that they have already won. You feel it as your own thought, not as an imposition. This is why species surrender who might not otherwise surrender. This is why the collective has won 417 times. Destroy the broadcast. The certainty shatters. What remains is reality, and in reality the collective is powerful but not invincible. The Shadow Breaker's purpose was to reach the collective's command vessel, not to destroy it, but to disable a specific system. One system. The broadcast array. While the combat vessels kept the collective's inner defense assets occupied, and the mirror ships kept their targeting systems overloaded, 16 Shadow Breakers, running Yamamoto Park drives at full capacity, crossed the distance to the collective's command vessel in a trajectory that arrived from angles the collective's outer defense was no longer fully covering. They didn't fire. They transmitted. A precisely targeted counterfrequency, derived from the framework specifications, implemented by the team in Nairobi who had solved the field stabilizer problem, at the broadcast array's specific harmonic. The array went offline. And across the Sovereignty Collective's fleet, thousands of beings experienced simultaneously the sensation of waking up from a dream they hadn't known they were in. The absolute certainty they'd carried, the deep bone knowledge that they had already won, that this was already over, that these creatures called humans were already defeated, dissolved like smoke. What remained was reality. And in reality, they were looking at a fleet of 73 ships that had, in the space of 11 minutes, penetrated their formation, overloaded their targeting systems, and disabled their command vessel's primary broadcast. For the first time in their history, the Sovereignty Collective was uncertain about the outcome of an engagement. It was General Vasquez who had suggested it 2 days earlier, in the conversation after Marcus came back from 1247 VOS and explained the framework. He'd said it quietly, almost as an aside, and at the time Marcus had thought it was an instinct, a soldier's instinct. Later, Marcus would understand that it was the most important insight of the entire operation. Vasquez had said, "We're not trying to destroy them. We're trying to change what they think is possible." The Black Armada did not press its advantage. After the broadcast array went offline, after the collective's formation began showing the first signs of tactical disruption, Okafor gave the order to hold position. The combat vessels held their positions inside the collective's formation. The mirror ships maintained pattern Sigma. The Shadow Breakers withdrew to standard distance from the command vessel. And then the Resolute broadcast a single tight beam message to the collective's command vessel. "We have made our point. We are willing to talk." There was a silence of 7 minutes and 40 seconds. Then the collective responded. The negotiation lasted 9 hours. President Morano conducted most of it, with Vasquez at her side and Marcus handling the communications translation. The collective's commander, they called it the Arbiter, was not what any of them expected. It was not angry. It was not humiliated. It was, if the translation was to be trusted, genuinely curious. It had not been curious about a species it was engaging with in a very long time. The framework, Marcus had noted, included a section on this. It said, if the Black Armada succeeds in the 3 phases, the collective will want to talk. Not because they are merciful. Because they are rational. They do not engage in revenge or pride-motivated continuation of a failed engagement. If a species can demonstrate that it cannot be easily overcome, the collective will recalculate. They are, at their core, an organization that believes in efficiency. Continued engagement with a species that has proven unpredictable is inefficient. The collective's first question was not about surrender terms or reparations or territory. It was, how? Morano, after a brief consultation with Marcus and Vasquez, decided to answer honestly. Or rather, partially honestly. She explained the framework, not where it had come from. There were limits to honesty when dealing with a civilization that had attempted to subjugate you 48 hours ago, but what it was. The principle of adaptive asymmetry. The human capacity to change everything in the middle of everything without breaking. The Arbiter was quiet for a long time after that. Then it said, we have encountered 3,214 species. We have never encountered what you have just demonstrated. We have records of the Black Armada as a theoretical concept. We were told it was a myth. It was, Morano said, until about 18 hours ago. Another pause. What do you want? The arbiter asked. Not in the tone of a supplicant. In the tone of someone doing a genuine calculation. The same thing we wanted before you showed up, Morano said. To be left alone to be what we are. That is not how the sovereignty collective functions. Then the sovereignty collective, Morano said, and her voice was very calm and very precise, might want to consider updating its functions. The agreement that came out of those 9 hours was not perfect. Agreements that matter never are. It was not a warm treaty of friendship or mutual admiration. What it was this. The sovereignty collective formally recognized Earth's status as a sovereign, independent civilization not subject to the collective's membership framework. In exchange, Earth committed to a non-aggression posture toward collective member worlds. They weren't going to start anything, and to a limited information-sharing arrangement on specific scientific topics that the collective identified as being of mutual interest. The collective got something, in other words. Not what they came for, but something. That was the other piece of the framework's wisdom, Marcus thought. You couldn't build a lasting peace by humiliating the other side. You could only build it by giving them something they could take back with them that wasn't nothing. The arbiter's final message before the collective's fleet began its withdrawal was directed personally to Commander Okafor. It said, "Your fleet is small and your world is young. We advise you to use the time you have bought wisely. The galaxy is larger than your current experience of it. Not all of what you will meet is what we are. Some of it is worse. Prepare accordingly." Okafor received the message on the Resolute's bridge. She read it twice. Then she said, to no one in particular, "We've been preparing for something since we first chipped a stone and figured out it was sharper on one end. We're pretty good at it." She set the message aside and began the process of recalling the Black Armada to Earth orbit. The world reacted to the news in the way worlds tend to react to events that are too large to fully absorb. Slowly, unevenly, and with a wide spectrum of emotion ranging from profound relief to continued terror to something that might be called shattered and reconstructed wonder. The footage of the Black Armada, taken from orbital cameras from the Resolute's exterior feeds, from 3 separate civilian observation platforms that had been watching the entire engagement, spread across every network on Earth within hours of the collective's withdrawal. 73 ships, dark-hulled, moving in ways that no conventional fleet had ever moved, disappearing and reappearing, folding the collective's vast formation into confusion in 11 minutes. People watched it in silence mostly. Some cried. Some cheered. Some watched it 3 times and then sat quietly for a while, processing something too large for immediate language. Marcus watched it once, on a small screen in the Denver Coordination Center, surrounded by the same analysts and engineers he'd been working with for 3 days. When it ended, someone started clapping. Then someone else. Then the whole room. Marcus didn't clap. He just sat, his eyes on the screen where the Armada was now visible in real-time feed, holding in Earth orbit, patient and dark and extraordinary. He was thinking about the room inside 1247 Voss. About the beings who had left the message and the blueprint. About what it must have cost them to survive their own encounter with the collective, and what it must have meant to them to leave this, to trust that someday someone would find it and use it. He was going to write a message back. He'd been thinking about how to do that for the past 12 hours. The room inside 1247 Voss would still be there. Still accessible. And if those beings had been able to embed a message inside the collective's own transmission, they had the means to receive a reply if you put it in the right place. He was going to say, "We used it. Thank you. You were right about us." But that was for later. Right now he was very, very tired. Dana Holt appeared at his shoulder. She looked like he felt, hollowed out by 3 days of sustained crisis, but with something underneath the exhaustion that was hard to name. She handed him a cup of coffee. He looked at it. It was actually hot. "I'm going home," he said. "Good," she said. "You should." "The Armada?" "Vasquez has it. It's going to stay in orbit for a while. We're keeping the crew rotation light. Most of the systems can be run remotely now that the AI is calibrated." "The framework," Marcus said. "All of it. We should publish the full technical documentation. Not just the weapon systems, all of it. The principles, the engineering specifications, the AI architecture. Everything. If the Arbiter was right about the galaxy being bigger and some of it being worse." "Already in progress," Dana said. "Morano wants a full scientific release within 6 months. We're going to share it with every member nation simultaneously. No one gets an advantage." Marcus nodded. That was right. The Black Armada wasn't an advantage for any one country or group. It was what it had been from the beginning. Something that only worked when everyone was building it together. He finished the coffee. He picked up his bag. He walked out of the UEDC building for the first time in 3 days into the Denver morning, cool air, blue sky, the Rockies standing solid and indifferent in the distance the way they always had. He called Claire. She picked up on the first ring. "I'm coming home," he said. She was quiet for a moment. He could hear the background sounds of home, kids, somewhere, the distant noise of the television, a door closing. "We'll be here," she said. He hailed a cab. Sat in the back. Watched Denver go by, normal, ordinary, unbroken Denver, people going about their Tuesday morning as if the last 3 days hadn't happened, or maybe precisely because they had happened and this was the other side of it and ordinary things were miraculous now in a way they hadn't been before. He was asleep before the cab reached the highway. The driver, a man named George who had been following the news on his phone between fares for 3 days, looked in the rearview mirror at the sleeping man in the rumpled clothes with the laptop bag, and had no idea who he was. He drove carefully. It seemed like the right thing to do. General Vasquez held his final briefing of the crisis at 2 p.m. that day. He stood in front of a room of exhausted, proud, disbelieving people and he said, in the straightforward way he said most things, 3 days ago we were handed an ultimatum. Today the people who issued that ultimatum have left our system and we are still sovereign. The Black Armada is in orbit. The agreement is signed. Earth is intact. He paused. I am going to say this once and then we are going to get back to work because there is a great deal of it left to do. What you people did in the past 72 hours is the most extraordinary thing I have ever seen in 40 years of service. I have served with great soldiers and great thinkers and great engineers. But I have never seen anything like what happened in those 18 hours of building, and I have never been more certain that if the arbiter was right, that if there is more out there and some of it is worse, I can't think of a species I would rather face it with than this one. Pause. Now get some rest. All of you. We start planning tomorrow. The room was quiet for a moment. Then from somewhere near the back someone said, Sir? Do we get to keep the Armada? And Vasquez, who had not smiled properly in 3 days, almost smiled. Yes, he said. We keep the Armada. 6 months later. The world was different now. Not unrecognizable. The coffee shops were still open, the traffic jams were still infuriating, children were still going to school and complaining about homework, and somewhere in Denver Marcus Webb was eating a ham sandwich again, this time at his kitchen table with his daughter on his lap and his son telling him about something that had happened at school and Claire across the table smiling at him over her coffee. But the world was different. The Black Armada framework had been published as Morano promised. The scientific community had spent 6 months processing it, and what had come out the other side was already reshaping physics, engineering, materials science, and artificial intelligence research in ways that were going to take decades to fully understand. The Yamamoto Park Drive system, now understood, properly implemented, was being developed for civilian applications. Faster, cleaner travel. The field stabilizer technology had applications in energy generation that were already in early-stage development. The mirror ship communication technology had implications for long-range signal transmission that 3 different research teams were already fighting over. The 15,000 engineers and analysts and specialists who had spent those 18 hours building the impossible had not simply gone home afterward and returned to their previous lives. They had formed something, not formally, not with an official title or a charter, but organically, the way the important things form. A network. A community of people who knew what it felt like to work on something that mattered that completely, and who were not willing to stop mattering that much. They called themselves, with the kind of characteristic human casualness that assigns important names to important things without making a big ceremony of it, the Builders. And the Builders were already working on the next thing. Commander Okafor was back on the Resolute, which had been given a permanent position as the Black Armada's command ship. She had declined 3 desk promotions in 6 months, with a kind of polite firmness that made clear the question did not need to be asked again. She was where she needed to be, on a bridge in space with her crew, running the integration drills that kept all 73 Armada ships in peak operational readiness. She also, in her personal time, had begun something else. She was writing. Not reports. Not tactical analyses. Something different. She had started it 2 weeks after the collective's withdrawal, late one ship night when she couldn't sleep and found herself sitting at the desk in her quarters with a blank page, and had written the first line before she even fully knew what she was writing. We did not know what we were capable of until we were told, very clearly, what we were not. And then we went and did it anyway. She wrote for an hour that night and every night for 6 months, and what she was writing was a history. Not the official one, that was being compiled by teams of academics and journalists and government archivists. This was her history. The one she had been inside. The bridge. The decisions. The 11 minutes. The strange, extraordinary, unrepeatable feeling of watching 73 ships move as one organism and knowing that the creature they had built was exactly what it needed to be. She didn't know yet if she would publish it. She wrote it for the reason most histories worth reading are written, because the thing happened and someone who was inside it had to try to understand it by putting it into words. Marcus had been back at UEDC for a month when the second message arrived. Not from the Sovereignty Collective. From somewhere else. A signal received at the array, carried on a frequency that Marcus recognized immediately because he had spent 72 hours becoming deeply familiar with that frequency range. He decoded it in 40 minutes. This one was clearer, not hidden inside another transmission, not compressed and layered. Direct. Intended to be found. It said, "We told you the universe is watching. It is. What you did has been observed by 39 civilizations within communication range. 11 of them are reaching out to establish contact. 3 of them have been where you have been. We are one of the 3. We would like if you are willing to meet. Not as supplicants. Not as allies. That word carries weight. We would rather you assign consciously, not reflexively. Simply as what we are, 2 civilizations that faced the same choice in the same darkness and chose the same answer. We think there are things we can learn from each other. We believe, specifically, that humanity has things to teach that the rest of the galaxy has not yet understood. We are attaching coordinates. The location is within your capability to reach, now that you have the Yamamoto Park system operational. The choice is yours. It always has been." Marcus sat with the message for a long time. Then he called Dana Holt. "We have something," he said. "What kind of something?" Dana asked. "The good kind," Marcus said. "The kind that means the last 72 hours weren't an ending. They were the beginning of something else entirely." Pause. "How much sleep have you had?" Dana asked. 8 hours, Marcus said. "I'm fine. I promise." "But Dana," he looked at the message on his screen. At the coordinates. At the plain, clear, extraordinary invitation from something that had survived what Earth had survived and wanted to compare notes. "This is real. And it's big. We need to tell Vasquez. We need to tell Morano." "Okay," Dana said. He could hear her already moving, already reaching for her jacket, already shifting back into the mode of motion that the last 6 months had proven she never fully left. "I'm on my way." Dr. Leo Hatch had been promoted 4 times since the crisis. He turned down every promotion that would have taken him out of active research, accepted the ones that gave him bigger labs and more funding, and spent the 6 months since the Black Armada's deployment in a state of scientific delirium so profound and productive that his team had stopped trying to keep up with him and had simply started documenting everything he said on the grounds that they'd understand it later. He was, on this particular afternoon, standing in front of a whiteboard covered in equations when his phone rang. He stared at the equations for another few seconds. He was on the edge of something. He could feel it, the specific quality of closeness that preceded a breakthrough, and then answered. It was Marcus. "Hatch," Marcus said. "The room inside 1247 Voss. The information on the walls. You remember the section in the upper left quadrant? The part you couldn't photograph clearly because of the light angle?" "Yes," Hatch said immediately. He remembered every square inch of that room. "I've been thinking about it," Marcus said. "The fragment I could read, before the light failed. I think I misidentified the symbol cluster in the 3rd row." "What did you think it was?" "Navigation," Marcus said. "But I've been looking at it again, comparing it to the other coordinate systems in the framework. I think it's not navigation. I think it's communication," Hatch said. A silence. "You've been thinking about it too," Marcus said. "For 6 months," Hatch said. "I think the room inside 1247 Voss isn't just a library, Marcus. I think it's a relay point. I think whoever put it there didn't just leave us a message and a blueprint. I think they left us a door." Another silence. "I think," Marcus said slowly, "that we need to go back." Hatch looked at his whiteboard. At the equations he'd been on the edge of cracking for 3 weeks. He picked up his marker. "Capped it. Set it down." "When do we leave?" he said. The second visit to 1247 Voss was different from the first in every way that mattered. The first time they had gone in darkness and desperation, with 43 hours left before an ultimatum expired, with the weight of 8 billion people pressing on every decision. They had found a room and Marcus had read its walls and brought back a blueprint for survival. This time they went in daylight, or rather in the quiet aftermath of crisis, when the world had caught its breath and the Black Armada was in orbit and the agreement was signed. They went with time. They went with preparation. They went with a team, Marcus and Hatch, Okafor, who had declared simply that she was coming and no one had argued, and 6 specialists, physicists, linguists, communications engineers, who had spent the past month reviewing every piece of data from the first visit and were burning to see the room themselves. Miles drilled the entry point again. Faster this time, now that she knew the composition of the rock. The room was exactly as they had left it. Warm walls, impossible in the cold of the asteroid. Data covering every surface. The section in the upper left quadrant, the part that Marcus had partially misread and Hatch had been pondering for 6 months, was what they went to first. Marcus stood in front of it. Hatch stood beside him. They studied it together, two people who had been thinking about the same thing from different angles and were now standing in front of the thing itself. There, Hatch said, pointing to the third row of symbols. That's not a coordinate format. The structural logic is different. See the recursive element? Navigation coordinates don't recurse. It's a handshake protocol. A communication system, Marcus said. Not navigation. A way to reach someone. Not someone, Hatch said. He pointed to the symbol at the end of the row, the one that they hadn't been able to photograph clearly, the one that had nagged at both of them for 6 months. Up close, in person with better lighting equipment, it resolved into something clear. Look at this symbol. You know what this means. Marcus looked. The symbol was one he recognized from other parts of the room, from the sections on the Black Armada's AI architecture, from the framework sections on coordinated systems. Network, he said. Not a communication system, Hatch said. His voice was very quiet, very careful. The way voices get when the thing being said is too large to say loudly. A network. This isn't how to talk to one civilization. This is how to connect to a network that already exists. He looked at Marcus. The civilization that left this, they didn't just survive the collective and leave us a blueprint and a message. They built something. Something that other survivors joined. Something that's been waiting for us to survive, Marcus finished, and find the door. The two of them stood in front of the wall of 1247 Voss for a long moment. Then Okafor's voice came from behind them. Can you activate it? Marcus and Hatch looked at each other. The framework specifies the activation sequence, Marcus said slowly. I skipped that section on the first visit because I thought it was navigation. I thought it was a location record. I didn't. He stopped. Reoriented. Give me a few minutes. It took him 40 minutes. He read the upper left section carefully, all of it tracing the recursive handshake protocol, following the logic of the activation sequence. The communications engineer on the team, a quiet woman named Dr. Sophia Renner, who had barely said 3 words on the transit but was now barely restraining the urge to start copying equations onto every surface available to her, helped him cross-reference the signal architecture. At the end of 40 minutes, Marcus turned to the team. We need to broadcast a specific signal from 1247 Voss's surface. The room is the transmitter. It's been dormant since it was built. We provide the carrier wave, we can do that with the Resolute's communication array, and the room generates the activation signal. What happens when it activates? Okafor asked. We get a response, Marcus said. From whoever is on the network. Whoever is on the other end of the handshake. And then? Marcus looked at her. He thought about the message from 6 months ago. The first message, the one hidden inside the collective's own transmission. The message that had said, the universe is watching. The message that had trusted humanity to be worth the bet. And then, he said, we find out how large the universe actually is. The signal went out at 3:47 p.m. ship time. A carrier wave from the Resolute, feeding into the room inside 1247 Voss, triggering the activation sequence that the framework had encoded into its upper left panel, patient and waiting since before any human being currently alive had been born. The room lit up. Not metaphorically. The walls, the warm, impossible walls that had no business being warm in the cold of an asteroid, began to emit light. The symbols and diagrams and equations glowed, softly at first, then brighter, cycling through a sequence that matched the activation protocol Marcus had read. The communications engineer, Dr. Renner, made a sound that was approximately what you make when you have spent your entire career working towards something and then it happens in front of you and your brain briefly forgets how to form words. The handshake signal went out. Not through radio waves. Not through any communications medium that Earth had developed. Through something that the framework described and that Dr. Hatch had been trying to understand for 6 months and now, watching it happen, understood completely. A medium that moved faster than light. Not because physics didn't apply, but because the framework had found a way to use physics that Earth hadn't fully explored yet. The signal went out. And came back. Not from one direction. From everywhere. From 39 signals simultaneously, each one distinct, each one carrying the specific marker of a different civilization, each one saying the same thing in its own way, in its own form, in its own language. Hello. Welcome. We have been waiting. You are not alone. The team was silent for a long time. The room was glowing around them, the walls alive with light, the handshake signals cycling and responding and building into something larger than any of them had expected to be standing inside. It was Okafor who spoke first. She said very quietly, "Abiswayamjhai. From now on, nothing is ever going to be small again." Marcus Webb filed his report to General Vasquez and President Morano from the surface of 1247 VOS, transmitted via the Resolute's relay. It was the third most important report he had ever written, after the translation of the collective's ultimatum and the decoding of the hidden message. He filed it, and then he sat on the surface of the asteroid, in his suit, looking out at the black, at the stars, at the distant blue point that was Earth, and he thought about ham sandwiches. He thought about how 3 weeks ago he had been sitting at his desk, going through boring reports, eating a ham sandwich, and the alarm had gone off. And how between that moment and this moment on the surface of an asteroid, in contact with 39 civilizations, having built the Black Armada from scratch in 18 hours and negotiated with the Sovereignty Collective and decoded a door in a room that had been waiting for humanity for longer than human civilization had existed, everything in his understanding of what was possible had been rewritten. And he thought, that's the thing, isn't it? That's the thing about being human. You are always, in the middle of becoming something you didn't know you could be. The becoming is never finished. You get through one impossible thing and the universe opens a door, and on the other side of the door is the next impossible thing, bigger and stranger and more beautiful than the last. You don't know you can do it until you have to. And then you do it. And then the universe says, good. Now here's the next thing. He looked at the stars for a while. 39 civilizations out there in the dark, waiting. Some of them had been where Earth had been. Some of them had faced worse. Some of them had things to teach and things to learn and things that would challenge every assumption humanity had built over the 10,000 years of its civilization. He wasn't afraid. He was ready. President Morano addressed the world 6 days later. The network of 39 civilizations had been confirmed, initial contact had been established, and the scope of what was opening up was beginning to be understood. Not fully, not yet, but enough to speak about with honesty. She stood at the podium and she said, 3 weeks ago we were told to kneel. I want to talk today not about the fact that we refused, though we refused and we were right to refuse, but about what that refusal made possible. Because the refusal wasn't just a military act. It wasn't just the building of the Black Armada, extraordinary as that was. The refusal was a statement about what we are. About the thing that no ultimatum from any power in any galaxy can take from us, which is the right to keep becoming what we are not yet. We are a young civilization. We have made, and will continue to make, enormous mistakes. We are not wise by the standards of what we are going to encounter. But we are stubborn and we are creative, and we are capable of doing in 18 hours what others said could not be done. And apparently that matters. Apparently out there in the dark there are others who noticed, others who were watching, others who are now reaching out to say, hello. We are not alone. We have never been alone. And from now on we get to figure out what that means, on our terms, in our way, as what we are. She paused. Caro, she said, the word that in the language of the moment meant now we begin, the real work starts. Indeed.